completely eroding around them. Everything that they have done for generations is disappearing. Next slide. Look at this. This was covered in forest. The forest cover in northern Pakistan is approximately 5% of what it was 150 years ago. 5%. 95% of the forest has been cut down, either by the British or by the Pakistan government itself. 95% in this tremendously mountainous terrain. So all these little settlements are in danger. When you add glacial melt, when you add severe flooding, they disappear. They just disappear off the map. They're gone. There's no hope for them. They have no way to stop this. We're behind a lot of these problems, and we're not doing anything to help them. But these communities are tremendously imperiled, tremendously vulnerable. Look at next slide. Just think of what happens to this during a massive flood. And we know that this is a region that's going to experience more and more flooding. Next slide. This is so what do people, they engage in drug trafficking and things like that, because they have to find a way to survive. If they lose their agricultural land, if they no longer have a way to feed their family, it isn't like there's lots of other jobs up there. So the easiest job right now is drug trafficking. And this is, and this is Afghanistan, and on the other side is Pakistan. And it can move quickly. It's very hard to, I spent a week with the UN drug prevention group there. They have a thankless job, I'll tell you, because they're essentially taking tremendously poor people and burning down their fields. And there's nothing in place. There's nothing left for them. Next slide. So they gravitate to towns. This is Deer, which is famous because of the madrasas and the Taliban and so on. But all these young people who have been forced off their agricultural areas gravitate into places like this or down to Karachi. And there aren't many prospects for them. Next slide. This is the refugee camp that was set up in 1979, so it's still there. That's like almost 30 years. That's a refugee camp. This is a camp which doesn't have any significant waste management system, any significant water system. When I walked in there, within about 2 minutes, there were probably 20 little kids holding on to me, holding on to some part of my clothing. It was a remarkable thing. They had been born there, they were raised there, that was the horizon of their world. And they were just, reaching out for some human contact, anything. What can we do with that? Next slide. That's more of the refugee camp. I think I have a couple of the other refugee camps. We are sending more and more of the world's vulnerable, poor people, children, women, unemployed people into these camps around the world, chased out of their historic areas by war or desertification or flooding or disease outbreaks, and it's happening more and more, and we don't have any way of dealing with them. Next. There's the madrasas, so other people are capitalizing on this, providing other opportunities. Next slide. We make small efforts. This was a UN effort to wean people off the poppy cultivation and encourage them to grow onions. But what we saw were all these onions rotting beside the road because the infrastructure doesn't exist to get them out dependably. So unless we really sort of invest in solving problems, the problems of the world, the problems that we're showing that we can make smaller and smaller iPods and faster computers. And about 6 billion people in the world don't need that. They don't need a smaller iPod, they don't need a faster computer, they don't need a slightly better TV screen. They need energy and water and housing and hope and dignity. And we could be using a little bit more of our tremendous capacity to work on these things, and a little bit less to get everybody another different colored iPod or a faster computer. I mean, right now, I watch my students, they're going through a computer every year. Every 15 minutes, they've got a new technical gadget. It doesn't improve their lives. It's just this massive sort of frivolous use of the world's resources and time. What we need is to protect, this is a beautiful area. And we need to find ways to bring some of the sort of bounty that we have enjoyed for 200 years into the rest of the world. Because if we don't, and we have a responsibility, it's not just in our interest, we have a moral responsibility. We're a large measure of the cause of this particular problem. And we have a responsibility to be a large measure of the solution to this particular problem. So thank you very much.
What I want to know is what are we going to do when we keep having people in Congress who obviously they must have some idea of what's happening and they're not doing anything about it. What can we do?
we have a system, we have 300 million people, a democratic system, and probably, you know, depending on definitions, probably around 5% of the population is politically engaged. So essentially 95% of the population sit back and complain. They say, I don't care, I don't like the situation in Iraq, but I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to sit there and watch TV. Well, you know, there are groups who spend their entire lives in D.C. lobbying. I worked in D.C. for 4 years. And the Congress responds to the people who are there lobbying them. And if, you know, our 18 to 25-year-olds, they don't vote and they don't become involved politically. They have the capacity to reshape this country dramatically. So we have to somehow, politics has become a sort of dirty business. It's unattractive. People don't want to participate in it. People don't want to campaign. They don't want to, you know, bring up new issues. They sit back and they're passively fed by television. I mean, you know, we're a democracy. A democracy requires that we become engaged politically. It requires that we attend meetings, that we make that extra effort, that we send letters, that we make phone calls, that we do things. If we don't, of course nothing's going to change. You're right. Most people in this country the vast majority of this country disagrees with the government on Iraq, on terrorism, on stem cell research, on Cuba, on all of these issues. Gay marriage, they disagree with the government's position, but they don't do anything. I think the one thing we have to do is we have to get involved. That's the beauty of a democracy. We can say what we want. We can do what we want.